Hello and welcome to the Game Dev Local podcast. I'm your host Max Louis and the founder and studio director of MLC. And today I'm sitting down with James Brady, experienced environment artist who's worked on series like Halo, Dying Light, Hitman series, and many other games that you'll know, but also works in the indie scene. He's a esteemed freelancer, has been doing it for many years, and has some amazing insights to share. So I hope you enjoy this episode. How are you doing, James?
Yeah, pretty good, thanks. How are you today?
Yes, very good. Thanks for coming on the GDL podcast. I'm looking forward to this one. We're going to have a good chat. And we're talking about freelancing. So, how long have you been a freelancer?
I have been freelancing for about 7 years now, out of the 9 years I've been in the industry. It's been quite a while.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah, so you did a couple years. What was it, like a couple years at the beginning in employment?
So my first year was Creative Assembly. I actually joined them as a QA tester on Total War Warhammer.
Nice.
And moved over to the UK, and then after that I moved from London up to Leeds to join Rockstar Games and worked on Grand Theft Auto Online and Red Dead Redemption 2 in junior capacity. Ironically, at the end of that year, I wanted to move back home, and we don't really have like an industry here, so kind of the only way that kind of worked was just to go freelance. So I kind of went freelance without giving it much thought. I kind of just went from being in the studio to just freelancing, and then being like, okay, I guess I just got to figure this out. So
yeah, is that because I'm sure I read somewhere online that you were saying it's like because you live in the middle of nowhere?
Literally, like at the moment, even here, I literally live on the side of a mountain in the Midlands of Ireland.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, like I use Starlink. Like we don't even get fiber here.
Really? Ireland's not that big.
No, it's tiny. It's so small. I'm about an hour from Dublin and an hour from Sligo, so I'm like nice and kind of cushy in the center.
Yeah,
everything's kind of within reach, which is really, really cool. So I moved home in 2017, and I basically went freelance from that point. My first contract was PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds.
Nice.
Now, ironically, I joined that project when it was still a little alpha game. So going to my manager at Rockstar, the biggest company in the world, and being like, hey, I am leaving to go work on this tiny little project, it was quite embarrassing, but we literally watched it grow from this tiny thing into the phenomenon it became, which was just insane.
That's insane. So you joined, how big was the team when you joined then?
So I was working with the team in Madison, in Wisconsin, the United States.
Oh, yeah.
Just as like a contract environment artist, doing a lot of like asset art and map art for Miramar, which was like the desert map that came out. It wasn't. I think it was just Madison and then Seoul, like the team in South Korea. So generic, like the team itself was very, very small. Like there wasn't an option on studio or anything. So we literally watched it grow to the highest played game on Steam as well in real time, which was just nuts.
And were you still working on the project at that point?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. What a cool feeling. That's like one of those opportunities that you just could never predict is going to happen, and when it does, it's like, I guess, humbling. It's awesome.
It was amazing. Like, and they sent me an E3 T-shirt and was Winner Chicken Dinner on it, and like anyone who's seen it immediately recognized what it was from. So I just thought it was wild.
You're like famous suddenly. That's very cool, and what a great. I can't stress how lucky you. I mean, you know this, but you were just so lucky to go into freelancing and that be your first gig. That's like, I mean, anyone who watches this who's freelancer would be like, yeah, that's not going to happen. That's great.
It was nuts. Like I got to work side a Warren Marshall who came from Epic Games. Like so, getting to work alongside him and other people was just awesome. And I mean, then it really kind of went into the having to sort of fake it till I make it, figure out how to freelance, how to network, and kind of get other projects.
Yeah, and man, I fucking love The Forest. And so when I saw that in your portfolio, I was so happy we were going to chat because that game was awesome. And I was telling my girlfriend about it earlier. I was like, the cog that you use to, like, when you're making stuff in your inventory, you made that cog, right? So. But like in reality, you've got loads of really amazing projects in your career and in your portfolio. One of the questions I had for you was like a lot of, there's going to be a whole wave of people who want to get into freelancing right now. Obviously, there's all the people who've been laid off, who now are deciding: do I try and get a job in games? do I just go freelance or should I just leave the industry? So I think
Yeah.
this conversation is more relevant than maybe ever. So I guess a lot of freelance artists would like to probably try and get into AAA, and I just wanted to know your experience of working in AAA and like, is it really worth it? Is it as good as it seems?
Sure. So definitely to start, no pressure.
Yeah.
So for me, I worked on PUBG first, and then I was more in the AA space in that at the start. It was very like working with like New Run Interactive and Surge Sandstorm, working with some of the new studios in Ireland. Yeah, and I think really it sort of came just at a point where I started to get more experience, and kind of hold my skills and get my portfolio up to AAA quality. And that kind of naturally started to just open the doors then to be able to actually reach out to AAA studios. I've worked with like Techland and Dying Light 2. I've worked with Liquid Development and My Search and Studio under Keywords on Halo Infinite, Halo Master Chief Collection, Firewall Zero Hour. I've worked with Art Bully on Rogue Company, Smite, a little bit of COD as well. Like it's just, it's really... Getting into AAA is very much like you will get studios who will take you on as a contractor, to work in those projects, but a lot of it is through vendors, like art vendors. Working on Life is Strange, that's a AAA project, senior environment artist remotely, working on Killing Floor 3. It just depends on the kind of the studio, kind of level of security. Sure, and I personally find that like since COVID, studios became more lax in hiring people remotely as well.
That's true. Yeah, I was actually at a talk on Tuesday, I think it was Tuesday, from XDS Spark, and they were talking. It was actually hosted by Riot, and there was Ubisoft, 343, and two other Riot, and then I can't remember who the other studio was. Someone big. EA, that was it. Easily forgettable. But they were all talking about. So they're like head of security, and they were talking about when producers come to them, they go, "Oh, we need this contractor on the team. How do they deal with that?" And they were talking about like clearance levels that vary depending on what you're working on. And I think specifically for artists, it's probably a little bit easier. Whereas if you're in programming and you're working with source code, because you have to be in there, you can't be isolated. Then it's not so great. And the hardest clearance was for when you're touching engine. Ubisoft really hound you hard for that.
Well, it's funny you said that. Like when it came to Techland, I got like an outsourced bite-sized version of their engine to like kind of get content in and get them like the UASset files like in Unreal terms, so they can implement it straight to the project. With like working on Halo, it was just source art going over to 343. Life is Strange, I was actually remoting into a machine in Colorado from Ireland. And then when I worked at Ghost Story and Judas, like they actually they sent me two machines because one broke, and then in the end I ended up remoting. So I literally had like two Ghost Story computers in my bedroom, just being like,
yeah, nice. Perks of the job, man. Can you use them for anything though? They're just like sat there.
It literally sat there. They pushed them over from Boston. I don't know what happened to the first one. It just stopped working. The second one, I must have done something and just broke it. And then they were just like, okay, we're not sending you a third machine. We'll just remote you in. So like through the entire year, I just had like in the corner of my bedroom beside my bed, I just had two Ghost Story Architecture Interactive computers, and I'm like, the thought isn't good. yeah,
that's quite funny. That nice. And with AAA work then. Like, is it worth it? Like, is it worth the trouble of trying to get into it, and is it fun?
I mean, it's fun. It's really fun because I feel like, to give you context, in 2019 I joined my friend Bryce Ciandro from Australia, and we've co-founded a outsourced studio called Next Gen Dreams 3D, and our first client was taken for Ghost Story. So we were very we were like little kids. It was kind of like that meme of when you go from a child to a man sort of thing. It was very much that transition where, when you're kind of working on triple or double A or indie, you kind of there's a certain quality bar and expectation that you can hit, but they're not super nitty gritty on it and technical on certain requirements of like quality output. But then when you go to AAA, they're very scrutinizing. For example, when I worked on Dying Light 2 at Techland, they were very like picky about the feedback and kind of really ensuring that like they get every little bit of juice they can out of each like asset I make, or so it really, you'll get to a point where you have that experience and then you can work with AAA studios, but it is very much like that's when you grow as a developer, and that's when you actually mature as a developer as well.
Sure. Yeah. I've had, I guess you've worked in AAA both as a freelancer and as an employee. Is it quite a different experience?
Yes. So the one thing I find with, as an employee, you kind of have your perks and benefits. You get the free merchandise, all that stuff. As a contractor, you're just treated like a contractor, so it's very much like you're billed for the hours you work, and that's kind of as far as it goes in terms of that relationship. Now, with when I was working at Tripwire, I was very lucky to get a bit of Tripwire merch as well for Kiln Floor. I worked at Build a Rocket Boy remotely, but that was an employee through like a third-party company. So,
yeah, and I think that's going to become more common. At Develop Brighton, we had a lot of conversations with people who wanted like staff augmentation, and they want integration into their own teams. So they don't want to employ, but they'd like to employ. So they're de-risking for them, but they're doing it through the third party. But they want that full integration.
Oh, absolutely. It's really it's kind of getting the employment without worrying about the tax implications of it or having to set up an entity.
Yeah, and the liability. So if you lay them off, you don't feel as bad.
Yeah. And, to be honest with you, I feel like from my own kind of experience with how the industry has been going and kind of all the layoffs and stuff that are happening, I find that you're going to find more people who are less inclined to relocate for companies because there's no job security, there's no guarantee of a future, and people like myself just want to put roots down and be like, this is where I'm at, if you want me, hire me from here. Now there will be companies who will never align to that, like Naughty Dog, Epic, Blizzard, 343. Now in saying that, I don't know what's like in America, but hiring from Europe to America, I don't see that happening. But like other studios are super open to it. I've worked 80% of the clients I've worked with are American companies. So
yeah, same. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a vast majority of the work we do is with American clients for sure. And then you mentioned networking earlier, and actually there's a nice little segue into marketing yourself as a freelancer is undeniably so important. It's easier when you have a network of people that you've already got from working in a career of games, and I'd argue that it's easier to freelance after like 3 or 4 years of being an employee. But if you haven't had that, like if you're just freelancing, what sort of things have you found work well to get work in, to market yourself?
So for me, I very much went into the world of freelancing as a junior artist, so I didn't even go into like senior level or lead level. It was basically like as if I literally just started my industry experience as a freelancer, really just made the word itself. I was very blessed to have PUBG as my first client, but it's very much like start small, go for the indies, go for the AA studios. Like they're the ones that you have a higher chance and shot with. It really it's a weird thing because I feel like it's just right place, right time. It's very important that you have your work visible and you just kind of put your best foot forward in terms of your experience and the work itself and your portfolio. But also it's very important that you just network as hard as you can. Like you have a LinkedIn profile, you're reaching out to everyone, you're adding everyone.
Oh, you mean like digitally networking?
Yeah, like it's literally like you create LinkedIn, you add like the stakeholders of studios and the art department, like lead art or art directors and lead artists, and it's like over time you will, because the industry is so small, you will actually build connections naturally. For example, when I worked on with Ilphonic and Ghostbusters, I was working with Tramiel Isaac, who is a guy who made the original Pip-Boy and Fallout, worked on Duke Nukem and stuff, and he was at Boss Key Studios prior on Lawbreakers, and I would just hound him every once in a while on LinkedIn being like, hey, I want to work on Lawbreakers, you guys looking for any artists? And then like a few years go by and he just reaches out randomly and he's like, yeah, we're making Ghostbusters. So
nice.
And it was the same then going to Tripwire, where it was very much my art lead at Tripwire just came from Ilphonic. So of course he's like reaching out to Ilphonic, like, hey, what does this guy like to work with? So your reputation is so important as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's not just your reputation of like doing a good job, but also if you ever leave that business, leaving as a good leaver and leaving on good terms is
it's
even
really
if you're a contractor, like that, it's got to be good.
Yeah, like when I transitioned from Tripwire over to Build a Rocket Boy, I did like I completely fulfilled my notice period and everything. Like that's just really
Yeah.
important because it's really that kind of thing where you want to leave a place as you find it. You don't want to go and wreck it and leave
Right.
it. It's just kind of like I think it's more like just like moral compass thing where at the end of the day you're all humans just making a project, so you don't want to leave anything on not good terms.
Yeah. It should just be like basic stuff, right?
Yeah, literally.
Just
Like
kind of
life
a given.
101.
Yeah, exactly. But like, so how do you? I mean, so we've got like about 150 freelancers in our network, right? And everyone has different ways of doing freelance. Like some people like to do. We've got some people who like 10, 20 hours a week, and then they're happy, and they treat it kind of like a lifestyle business. And then we've got other people who treat it like full-time job where they just want to do it at specific hours. That's pretty unusual. Most people though, they kind of fit on, do all the work when it comes in and then take these breaks for like a week or two and then do loads of work. Like how do you structure that?
So, if I'm totally honest with you, when I started, I just went ham. Like, I literally was working 3 projects at once. Like, it was 16-hour days, just, but I think...
Make it bank.
Yeah, like, it's one of those things, so, like, when you go freelancing, you're working for yourself, so it's not like you feel like you're working for an employee anymore, and our companies are contracting you with the trust in your ability and you as a person to deliver, which is a huge compliment, when you have studios like or Tripwire or Deck9 or other AAA studios doing it, so it's very much like you have to honor that. So for me, I really I was so hungry to just because I came from a junior art role where it was very restricted and I just wanted to grow. So I kind of stepped out and I just got very, very hungry to take on as much as I could, kind of absorb as much as I could.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, on my portfolio and stuff, I've worked in so many different projects. It's just been a kind of consistent rotating thing. And yeah, I mean, I think work-life balance is very important. And I think if freelance offers you the flexibility to be able to sort of have your own breaks, your own kind of hours and such, then that's really, really, really good and really important. That's something that's important to me now. As to when I was younger, I was just constantly working, but now I would if I was to move into a new role as a freelancer, I would like to be at least starting at 1 p.m. or something and working later, than working early. So
yeah, loads of our team also they just live on their own time zone.
Yeah,
it's just like starting a bit later, finishing way later. Like we've got one person, I come in the morning and sometimes she's still on, and I'm like, how are you still on? And she's in Mexico, and her hours are just like crazy wild, and but whatever works for the individual, and that's the point, right?
Yeah, and it's funny when you say freelance, and when I was at Creative Assembly, the company that really inspired me to become a freelancer and the company that inspired me to also co-found a Nice Source studio was Art Bully Productions. So Alan Van Ryzen and Marcus Dublin and Ivan, the guys, they've always been a massive source of inspiration to me. And I remember at Creative Assembly looking at the Art Bully site and stuff and being like, that's what I want to do. That's where I want to go. So kind of their inspiration to me kind of drove me to getting as engrossed as I have been in the industry.
Right.
And it was really nice getting to actually work alongside them and get compliments from them, which is pinch self, but yeah, that's kind of where it all kind of started.
What do you mean inspiration with them? What's inspiring?
So more so when I looked at Alan, it's all of them came from Chaos Studios working on Homefront and started Art Bully, and they all worked freelance, they all worked on different projects, and I was kind of, I just got into the industry, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do, and it was very I don't want to be pigeonholed onto one project for 6 years, kind of, I wouldn't be able to sustain that. And just getting to kind of taste all the flavors basically as a freelancer and try different projects, now in saying that, the one thing I have found, the longer you are in your career as a freelancer, the harder it is to transition back to full-time work.
That's interesting.
And it's more because companies just for example, on my resume I have 15 games, in 9 years, and companies going to look at that and think, oh, he jumps, he moves around, but more the nature of just freelancing. It's not so much untrustworthy, so that's kind of the only pain point I find. So if you go into freelancing, it really has to be with the mindset of knowing that this has to be a long-term thing.
Yeah, I could definitely see, like, if it's listed on your CV as if like they were all almost like they were all jobs. But if you had it as I was freelance for this long, and these are the projects I contributed to, I would say if I were reading that, I would look at that and go, cool, this person was successful as a freelancer, which meant that lots of people validate that this person is good at what they do. And
absolutely,
that's quite cool. So there can be strength there. I guess it depends on how you frame it. Really, it depends on the hiring person, if they're a dickhead or not.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I've had recruiters and art leads and art directors be like just wowed by my resume, and then I've had others who are just completely like, yeah, this doesn't look good at all. And it kind of leaves you in a place of like, oh God, like, am I in a good place? So you have to kind of just trust your own worth and ability as well, and understand that. Like,
that's a big topic. That, like, we're always trying to get artists to truly value themselves. It's just it's pretty common that like freelance artists that maybe haven't done AAA, or maybe it's just everyone, but I know there's obviously the imposter syndrome, but it's like not valuing themselves and their time and their abilities, and not. They recognize they're good at it, but when it comes to recognizing that in front of other people, suddenly it's like, oh no, I'm like, and they're a bit too humble, I find.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I also went through that when I started. Like, when I started freelancing, I was like, to be blunt, I was on like €800 a month because I just completely lowballed myself because I thought this is the only way I'm going to get into my foot in, And alongside that, I remember like a year and a half into it, I would be like lying in bed at night thinking, oh crap, is this sustainable? Like, can I actually, So, I think every artist faces that, and I don't think it matters how long you've been in the industry. Like, even now, this year has been very quiet in terms of the employment front, and of course I've had moments where I'm like, oh God, but it's important to remember, like, you've worked on a lot of different projects, and like your work is visible, and that goes for any artist. Like, it's like the proof's in the pudding. So
And how do you, I guess, as a freelancer, like, you have to prepare for. Yeah, I mean, it's part of the job that there are times where you are not working on something. It's just part of how it works. Especially with the games industry or entertainment like this, where it's like everything's in cycles. Like, you're working on a project and then that finishes, and maybe while working on it, you just didn't have time to look for the next thing.
Yeah.
Or maybe you said no to someone, and then like 3 months later, you actually could have said yeah. And that's like really frustrating, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, for me, it's very much like I just try to hustle as much as I can.
Right.
Like, even if I'm working on like, I never put myself in a situation where I'm just working on one project at once. No. Because I look at it like Hydra heads. Like, you have to have multiple on the go. That if you lose one, you don't lose your source of income. So for me, it's just I send emails out. I'm always emailing. I'm always in communicating with studios, even if it's like nothing available at the moment. Just being like, hey, I'm here. I'm available if that requirement comes up. And that's how you become that person, and that people reach out to if they need X, Y, and Z. Yeah, I mean, to be completely honest with you, I've never seen the kind of industry in the state it's in at the moment. Like, I've always had more than I can chew, but this has actually been the first year where things have been just completely crickets for me.
Yes.
So
it's so peculiar. Like, last year was pretty rough for us, where we had times of, like, it was just like, I don't know, it felt like we were down 70% of work, which is just insane. And but then this year did pick up a little bit, but it was so not out of it yet. Like, if anyone is like getting work as a freelancer or as a studio right now, you've got to be really cautiously optimistic about how long that's actually going to survive for. And hustling hard, but the hustling never stops, really, like you say, right?
No. I mean, I literally, in February this year, I was hit by layoffs at Build a Rocket Boy, and it literally came out of nowhere. Like, within.
Were you?
Yeah, like, literally come online on the Monday, and then Tuesday I didn't have a job anymore, and I was just like, what the hell?
Right.
Like,
with Build a Rocket Boy, were you employed or contracted?
Remote employee, yeah. So just working employee. But I think, like, going forward in this industry, it's very important to carry that mindset as a freelancer, to know that, like, every penny counts and every minute counts, and time is money, and you really have to just keep yourself as buffered as possible. If that's not savings, then having enough work or communication ongoing that if one thing falls short, that you have something to lean on. And that's why I also try to do some kind of teaching on the side to sort of support and compensate. It really, when it comes to, in those moments where freelancing is hard, you have to kind of lay the principles down in front of yourself and be like, why am I freelancing? Why did I choose this? What is the benefit? In terms of like, when you go from a studio position to freelancer, you have to remind yourself as to why you did it. And then that kind of helps you keep going. It helps to motivate you and drive you forward, and that's always helped me over the years as well, in those moments of just like, is this sustainable? And then, and I'd say over the last 3 years, I've always found that like, when things start to go quiet and you start to worry, then you're hit with so much work and you can't chew it all.
It's all at once, right?
Yeah. So
yes. I know. That's irritating. I know that seems to always happen. It's like, and it's worse when it's like everything that you want to do, and it's you've just been sat there waiting for it.
Yeah.
I know. And how do you figure out how do you structure and how do you figure out how much to charge? How do you do that?
So for me, it was very much just going on poly counts and research and freelancer rates, because I have no idea what my worth is.
That's how it all starts, because like you have to just pluck numbers out of anywhere. Yeah.
And I think like for me, what I started doing was just raising it and raising it and raising it until I hit that threshold, and then understanding, okay, so that's my worth. But I think it's also important to remember that even if you have a lot of experience, you're going to be competing with people from like India and stuff, right? So you have to try and be reasonable with your rate, but not lowball yourself. Keep it enough where it's comfortable, but just realize that there is competition, and companies just want resource and they don't worry about kind of the quality. The quality will always be there, but they're looking at just the financial side of it. So,
yeah, the finances always have a big deciding factor. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think I've noticed over the past few years is places that were typically sort of cheaper labor, so maybe Eastern European, parts of Asia, certainly parts of as well South America. A lot of those places, people are starting to raise up their rates, and I've definitely seen an increase coming from those places, which is great actually, because what it's doing is it's kind of helping the whole industry. It's great for them because they're able to earn more, and it doesn't really matter if they're not, like, one of the things we've got MLC is we pay people $25 an hour minimum, no matter where they live. So if somebody's in Brazil, we had one guy who was like, I'm $6 an hour. We're like, no, you're not. That's way too low. And they were amazing, right? But I think if we find that a more standardized rate globally starts happening, there'll be little pockets of more expensive rates, sure. I think that will help everyone.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. It equalizes everything, so then you don't end up with that like mass reduction of like, we have people in America where, one artist in America is equivalent to 3 artists in India, all starts to equalize, like for me, I kind of try and I sort of try to base my rates on the American rates, because it's really like, at the same time, when you get experience and you get multiple titles under your belt, like that has its own weight and gold as well. So, and that goes back to just as an artist not underballing yourself or doubting yourself or kind of underselling yourself.
Yeah. I mean, one way to do it is always to figure out how fast are you actually working, because that, like, when I used to do and I occasionally sometimes do some graphic design freelance work. And it would be mainly like website UI, UX, that sort of stuff. And there came a point where I was just getting through them super, super fast, that like an hourly of like 25, 30 pounds no longer made any sense. It would be like I could build you a website for like 300 pounds and it wouldn't make any sense, because the tools out there make it so much quicker. But the experience and doing it so many times, I've created my own way of doing it that's much faster. So in the end, I was like, well, if I was charging, like, let's say I was charging 30 an hour before and it took me 30 hours. And so it was like 900. And now I'm so fast, it's like 300. I still need to be at the 900 or maybe even more. Like, I'm doing it even faster. So I ended up, my rate ended up just being kind of, the way I did it was I was like, okay, for this particular piece of work, I want to earn a certain amount of money. If I earn a certain amount of money for it, it's worthwhile. and then I work backwards from there. So I'm like, I need to earn $1,000 or whatever. This will take me a certain amount of time to do. Maybe it's like $100 an hour, but that's kind of irrelevant. What's relevant for at least for smaller clients was like, well, it's $1,000 to get a website. Perfect. That's cool. Doesn't really matter how long you take, as long as it's a really good job. And I guess there's a lot of that in art too, for sure.
Absolutely, and I think you're right. It is good to look at it like that, because the more experience you get, the faster you get, and then it's like diminishing returns if you're outputting stuff very quickly at a reasonable rate, because then you're actually losing money. So that really does come into it as well, for sure.
Yeah, and like you said, you started just like 800 euros a month. I mean, that's so classic. I remember my first trade was $100. It took me, that took me like 15 hours to make. I made nothing on that, but that's a good way of doing it too, where you basically set yourself a target for how much you want to earn in the month, and then you just work backwards from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think now I've hit that kind of cozy spot where I'm like, okay, I know my worth. I know, like, it broke down from annual to months to hour, and just literally that's how I do it now.
Do you take into account breaks though? The breaks in work?
Not really, not for freelance. I mean, if when I worked at like Tripwire and Deck9 as an employee, well, basically freelancer but contracted full time. I took an hour just for like dinner or whatever if I was working American time, because lunch is kind of before I'd start, so that was irrelevant. I mean, it wouldn't really. I would just treat it like a full time role, but just paid as a contractor. Now, if I'm doing kind of like, if let's say I'm working on 2 clients, 2 different projects, doing like 24 hours each a week, then it's kind of, I kind of just fit that in where I can. And, if I want to get out and go for a walk or go into town, run errands, then I just stay a bit later at night or finish a bit, or start earlier. Like, there's really,
Yeah, so, but you wouldn't, because I mean, that's the other thing. There's your worth and value, but sometimes there's also like charging a little bit extra because you'll have this involuntary gap of work. Like, there's the voluntary side, sure, but then there's also the involuntary side where you're kind of preparing, knowing that something is, and it's actually, the less stable a piece of work is, kind of the more you should charge, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, it's also like, if you join a client and they're like, okay, we want like really fast turnaround, or we need a fast turnaround, then you charge more, because ultimately your job's going to be finished a lot earlier, but you still need to account for that gap of like whatever. So like, if you literally kind of, we're going to account for a month of work and they're like, okay, I want it done 2 weeks, then charge more to kind of compensate for the additional 2 weeks that you're not working, so you still get your return.
Yeah, and usually when it's a rush job, even if it's a set number of hours, you just might find that it just, at least mentally, takes up all your space, and that means it's the only thing you can do. If it's that rush, it's the only thing you can do, and you kind of can't even have the time to hustle on other stuff. Like, you just have to focus on it, and that has a cost to it too.
Absolutely, and you'll approach clients where it'll align with your kind of the hours that you set. You'll be able to get the output that you need and get paid for those hours. But at other times, like for example, when I worked on Dying Light 2 with Techland, it was like, we're going to give you X amount for X amount of assets, for example. And there will be feedback revisions and such, and really and truly it starts to become diminishing returns, because the longer you spend feedback, the more money you're actually losing, because you're still getting paid the same for it, so there's also that side to it as well. It just really depends on kind of the agreement.
Yeah, nice. Would you ever go back full time?
To be honest with you,
you just come out of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird one, because I've freelanced for most of my career, been remote for most of my career, but I feel like with how quiet things have been, it's something I'm starting to explore now, where, I'm talking to Epic Games for a full-time role. I have an interview next week with People Can Fly. I've applied to Ubisoft Montreal. It's really, the way I'm looking at it is like, if I have to go back full-time, I'm going to relocate, because I want to make it worth my while, versus trying to, because unfortunately these companies won't accommodate remote from Ireland, for example.
So you would do it
if I could, 100%. Like, if I could work remote from Ireland.
No, but you'd be prepared to go and relocate.
Yeah. I feel like it would be kind of, because I work a lot better in my own space, so if there was kind of accommodating where it's like, hey, you could be in the studio once a week and 4 days a week you work from home, then I'd do it for sure. I'm kind of at a crossroads right now, so I know People Can Fly are very much open to remote. I'm also talking to Gearbox for a potential freelance contract at the moment as well. So,
that'd be nice because it's freelance too.
Yeah, so still very much kind of exploring opportunity for sure, but it's just, I guess it just really depends what the outcome is.
Yeah, but the way that you've attacked this is wide, and you've kind of gone out and do that as much as possible. And I think that's where you've probably found success in the past. It's like
Yeah,
you've never you seem like you're pretty like relentless with that part of it, and there are a lot of people who just like apply to everything, and that applying is casting a wide net, I guess, and just doing as much as possible. But not only that, but also paying enough attention to do all the follow-ups. You mentioned that earlier on as well.
yep.
So I think you're probably quite good at sales and business development.
Yeah, do you know, it's the weirdest thing. I've realized I've got very, very good and smart at how I network and communicate, and
Right.
that has allowed me to get the projects I've had. Now, keeping in mind that, I go into this, I've never really kind of vocalized or communicated on professional level. So over the years, I've learned how to sort of hold myself to a standard, both vocally and by text, and be very professional. That yeah, it's all just kind of the experience of just understanding that as a freelancer you're selling yourself as a product, really. So
Sure.
you have to uphold that, to yourself and keep yourself accountable. But just to circle back to the comment that you made, I 100% agree. Like, it's really, the industry is in a very weird kind of state at the moment, and it's really just like you want to cast that net where it's like, hey, if I can stay remote, it means great, I get to keep this apartment, be close to family, have my life in Ireland. If that doesn't work out, then plan B is, yes, I need to relocate to another country.
Yeah, there needs to be a plan.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So yeah, but no, it really is. It's just about being relentless and just hustling as hard as you can to get the contracts and opportunities you want. I remember when I started applying to Liquid Development to work on Halo, I sent them so many emails where they sent me an email back saying, "Hey, can you stop sending us emails?"
No shame, and that's what it's about.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah, I think a lot of people could learn from that, not just people who are wanting to get to freelancing. Like that's yeah. I mean, there's no reason why you should hold off and be like, oh, I don't want to annoy them.
Yeah, yeah,
I think that's an interesting approach. I can see a lot of value in that for sure. Because I probably would, at certain points, I'd probably hold off and I'd be like, I don't want to annoy them. I don't want to tarnish my image. But it seems
yeah.
like it doesn't, from what you're saying.
Well, for me, I try to do it on a rotational basis. So I give people about, if I don't hear back in 2 weeks, I send another email. If I don't hear back after that, then I wait a month, then wait 2 months. But at the very most, every 2 months, I'm reaching out to the same people, being like, hey, I mean, they're probably getting the email in their inbox and they're just like, oh, this guy. But it's really just kind
We've
of
got
like,
some of those, yeah. Some people do that.
but yeah, it is very much like, it's so important that, like, there is a lot of freelancers out there. There's a lot of people, and it's important to just keep yourself on kind of the, you have to keep yourself visible to these people at all times. That's really, really important, and just by doing that, you actually accomplish that as well. So
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Cool. So one of the I may have touched on this earlier. I can't remember, but do you ever like, because when you started on your freelancing, you said you just went ham on it, just like the 3 projects at the same time. It was just way too much, and I think you probably quickly learned that that's okay, but it's not really sustainable. But like, do you ever get yourself in a position where you feel quite burnt out from being freelance, because you're in this mentality where, like you said, time is money, and it's like, if you're not working, do you ever feel like, oh, I should be working, I should be earning money, I could be doing this or that, and then you burn yourself out, or how does that work?
yeah, like when I started freelancing, I was very much like time is money, where if I wanted to sit down and play a video game in the evening, I'd just be like, oh, I'd be better off working and making money,
Yeah.
And when you start, for the first few years, it's totally fine. If you can sustain it, absolutely go for it. But I find in 2021, I hit burnout. When I was working on Dying Light 2, and I was also working as Art Bully, I just hit a wall, and I was out of commission for about 4 months.
Oh, yeah.
And from that point, then it became very much like, okay, there has to be a work-life balance here, and it is very much like I approach it now, where I'm like, if I get a full-time opportunity that compensates me well, then that's all I do. If I have a little bit of opportunity to do a little bit extra freelance work on top, I will. Or I'm working 2 projects, but within like a 40-hour, 45-hour a week.
Yeah.
Just trying to really keep it reasonable and not overdo it. it's very easy to say yes to a lot of work and then realize that you can't digest it all. So
Yeah, true, and it just hurts everything. It hurts like the project, which hurts your reputation. You gotta
yeah,
be careful with that stuff. Yeah, and not get too greedy, I suppose.
no, and
Which
I
is
think
hard.
yeah, exactly. And I think as a freelancer, your reputation is so important and it's so sensitive.
Yeah.
Where one bad experience with you, like you could, when you start, you could make a mistake, and even if like 4 years later you're so much more professional and you're a better artist and stuff, that company still may not be interested in working with you just from that initial
Yeah.
experience. So you have to treat everything like it really, really matters.
What do you think of art tests?
I I think when you start, yeah, 100%. I feel like companies need to see if you can do the work. The more you're into it, and the more projects you work on, like I would be very not inclined to do art tests now because I'm just kind of like I've enough on my belt to show that I can do the work. But I think if you're in a situation where you just really need the work and you're kind of like I don't have any other option, then yeah, 100%. You know, or there is a formality typically of AAA studios where even as a contractor, and it's the same with vendors, you'll do an art test because it's not that they want to pick and choose the best one, but it's more just like how far are you from our expectation and what do we have to do to support you. You know,
Yes.
when I joined Techland, I did an art test and it took like a month to get it right. I'd say there was like 8 revisions that were just wrong, but it wasn't really a case of like, oh, I get this wrong once and that's it. It was just more like, hey, we want to make sure that you can do the work before we sign a long-term agreement. So yeah,
Yeah.
no, I do. If they're treated that way, I agree with them 100%.
Yeah, and when we get so sometimes we get requested for art tests, and it depends who's doing the work from our team. And yeah, I mean, there are definitely times where I found it almost offensive, and you're like, it's like, have you even looked at the portfolio? You're asking me to do something that I've done. Well, not me personally, but like, that's it's. I find it can be a little bit strange, and nobody means it offensively, of course, but it can
Yeah,
be a little bit strange. But I think, yeah, I totally agree with you though. There's no point getting pride in the way of work. So even if
no,
you're like really senior and somebody wants an art test, you could do one if you really need it. But yeah, I mean, still valuing your time though, like, gotta be careful with that.
absolutely. I mean, ideally try and negotiate compensation for it, because again,
Oh
your
yeah,
time is money. But it is very much like you can be really, really good at your craft, and you can be very senior and worked on like 15 projects, but at the same time, you have to remain humble and understand that a company is only asking for an art test just to verify your ability. It's not that they don't trust you or believe that you have. It's just like, every contractual obligation is cost and time for them, and it has to be worth it. So they just want to kind of have reassurance that you can actually deliver. So,
yeah, yeah. We hardly ever do free art tests. I just because like for us we're like a network of artists, so we've got to try and for us it's like our duty to protect them
yeah,
from these kind of things. So we and it's a bit easier when you're a group, I would say, to just go like, no, you have to pay for the art test. I guess maybe on a freelance basis, you kind of haven't got the clout to start making demands unless you're very senior with, oh, I've worked on The Last of Us 1 and 2 and all that, right? Like there are
yeah,
certain things that you can have on there that, like, Nintendo or whatever it is.
yeah. No, 100%. It is like, and I think the other side of freelancing that nobody really talks about is like the more projects you work on, the more under NDA or NDAs you're under,
Mm,
and the less you're able to show of that work. So, like,
yes.
if you look at my website, I would say the art on it is like 3 years out of date, and a lot of the work is under NDAs, which is why I have a lot of just general screenshots from the game where it's like, hey, they actually have screenshots of the work I've done on it, but I can't just present that stuff individually.
Yeah, right.
So it's kind of like still being able to showcase it, but just staying within the legality of it. So
Yeah. How do you do you ever try and negotiate like, or how do you do the NDA stuff? Do you often put that in the contract or like discuss it before you start?
it's typically just the company would just send me one.
As in,
Um,
like, I didn't really phrase that properly. I mean, like, how do you make sure that you can share it with your portfolio when it's
um,
all said and done?
so there's not really ever a guarantee. Like for example, when I worked on Dying Light 2, when the project came out, I reached out to Techland like, hey, can I post all this work on my website? And they were like, well, No, because we did a few little polish adjustments and texture changes in house, so therefore it renders your work invalid. So you kind of, it kind of puts you in a situation where you're like, right. So,
Did you get credited for that?
yeah. No, I had to fight for a year to get in the credits. Originally, I wasn't in the credits, because I worked on a lot of hero stuff, so I was a bit like, that's nuts. So I fought with Techland for about 12 months, and then they put me in the credits. So I think like when it comes to, at the very least, being able to show your name in the credits gives validation that you've worked on it.
Yeah. Some people, they just take that as gospel. Like, if you say you worked on it, doesn't matter. What have you been credited in? It's like, that's an annoying one to ask. It's not fully representative, but yeah. I mean, I've had that question before, and I had to go. There's that website, Moby something.
Moby Games.
Moby Games. Yeah. Although, I remember once we were actually asked who needs to be in the credits, and I was like, I should just put myself in there. I didn't know, so I should have got a little credit. No, I did credit where it's due. I wasn't due to me; it was due to others. So.
Yeah, no, I think and the guys at Moby Games are great. Like, they try their best to keep that database updated. But for me, I just reach out to them on Discord and I'm like, hey, can you add me to this credit or that credit? I send them a screenshot of like the game credits and kind of what I did. Because I think it is a good reference point as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And did you see the? Do you know? Is it Phoenix Labs or Phoenix Games?
I know Phoenix Labs
in Vancouver or somewhere. Phoenix
yeah,
Labs?
that sounds familiar. Phoenix Labs.
LinkedIn. So it is Phoenix Labs. So Phoenix Labs has just cancelled a project, and they had to lay off a whole bunch of staff. But instead of obviously cancelled projects are a nightmare for artists and freelancers and whatever, and even employees, because often that means it's never going to be shareable.
No.
Because it's like cancelled, it might come in the future. No, it won't. It's like done now. So Phoenix Labs decided they would take a different approach, and they just let everyone share what they had. And obviously there would have been an approval process, but including vendors. So like people are sending all this work of stuff that we've never seen before for a project that was, I think, hardly even announced. And it's just it's weird to see that, but it feels so right to see that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know why we don't see that more.
Yeah, Free Radical did that with the cancelled the Time Spenders game, and then everyone was still able to go in and post in their portfolios of the work they did, which I thought was awesome. Right. I think there, I've seen with some vendors, there's a workaround where maybe you're able to share the work, but you can't say what game it's for. You can say it's an online project, or I know that like I seen Ryzen Art do that for some of the guns and stuff they worked on, where it was like an online scheme. Yeah, but I feel like with a lot of the games I worked on, they're still due to be released. So it'll be very much like, I'll just reach out to them when it comes out and be like, hey, can I get like screenshots? Now in saying that, there is, when I've been in or been supporting the recruitment process of studios, people sometimes share G Drive links to like NDA work that is strictly under NDAs and shouldn't be viewed. I would never risk doing that myself. I feel like that's very fine edge of you could get caught.
Yes. Yeah, I think there are different types for freelancers for this, where some people take the work I guess as it's not more seriously, but maybe it's people who have come from the employed side of AAA, have ingrained in them the kind of standards and practices that should be followed, and there are people who definitely do that more loosely, which is one of the reasons why it's difficult to onboard contractors into AAA. The security, that security part is really important, not just of their machine, but also of them as people. One of the things we do in interviews is we ask people about an NDA project, and then we see what they do. So instead of saying, are you good with NDAs? And they go, yeah, I'm great. You say, oh, so what was this project? What did you do? And tell me all about it. And they're like, no. Most of the time they're like, no, I can't tell you. I'm like, that's the right answer. Which is quite funny.
Yeah, it's literally like when it comes to me, where clients ask, like, or studios ask, like, oh, what did you do for this project or that project? I'm like, well, I can't go into detail, but I did props, or I helped our team with blah blah blah. But it was very just surface level, responsibilities versus the actual like content of the project. And I definitely agree. I think that's the best way to do it, because there is people who just disregard NDAs, and that hurts your reputation so much. And like even in my resume, I have it that I fully respect NDAs just as an insurance point for a
Right.
studio.
Shows you care.
Yeah, like when I worked at Techland with Techland and Dying Light 2, there was like a clause in my or non-compete where it was like any leak you'll have to pay Techland $25,000.
Really?
Yeah, and that
Oh
was
my
also,
god, that's such a big liability for an individual as well, isn't it?
yeah. And that also like doesn't it? Not only does that include like actual factual leaks, but even like suspicion of leak.
That's
Yeah.
harsh.
Yeah, so it was very.
You can imagine that. Like, you did nothing
Yeah.
wrong, and it's like, oh, 25k, please. Wow.
Yeah, so it is very like that's why like on my website under every project I'm like under strict NDA or all rights reserved to da da da, just to really kind of honor that stuff because yeah, you don't ever want to get in a situation where you have to owe a client 25 grand. Like holy crap.
And that reputation part is maybe even more expensive. Like,
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
That's it. Like game over. So, and I've seen that firsthand. I remember there was a guy I can't remember his name online who posted work from Call of Duty Ghosts or another COD
Oh, really?
under NDA. Yeah, and, he ended up in so much trouble and he had to take down the work and stuff. And yeah, I'm like, oh my god, I couldn't imagine doing that.
He'll be blacklisted, and unfortunately, from the AAA world, probably booted out of existence.
Yeah,
Like it's a big no-no, isn't it?
it is. It's like because at the end of the day, you're working on multi-million-dollar
Yeah.
properties and like it's all competitive and if you at the end of the day that's money, that's a lot of money, and like if you kind of add or contribute to a leak then you are basically damaging you're kind of damaging opportunity and
Yeah. Yeah, with 25k is probably letting you off lightly in some cases.
oh 100% like yeah Jesus like yeah 25,000 is not compared to maybe like 100 million or
Yeah,
100.
right. It's nothing. It's literally nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess they have to limit it because if they ask you for like $1 million, you're gonna be like, nah, how am I supposed to pay that?
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
also I think it's a way to sort of like keep you in check as well, where you're like I do not want to owe anyone that, so I won't do it.
Yeah, I don't think they actually expect it to happen. That's what contracts are there for, though, and I think that's a really important point for people, is that like almost everything in a contract is not because everyone expects all of those things to happen. All the termination agreements and stuff like that.